In 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the very, very first episode of The Art of Fuel with myself, Anthony Manuel. I'm here with my friend, Bryan Mirabella. I wanted to start this podcast as almost like an add-on podcast to The Art of Move, because we've talked about the nuances of unconventional ways of looking at biomechanics, and we talked about movement and returning to a natural way of living in your body in terms of movement. And I wanted to start this podcast as a way to observe how we fuel the body, because the body in movement is fueled by food at the end of the day. Food, water, sleep, sun, all these things are sort of a part of a bigger picture. And this is a really important conversation. I started my own nutrition journey. For those of you who are new here and don't know much about me, I started my own nutrition journey when I was 15. I weighed 287 pounds. And
What?
yeah, I'll post a picture on my Instagram at The Body Moves. I'll post a picture after when we do the launch of this podcast. But I weighed 287 pounds when I was 15 years old. And I suffered through different eating disorders, and eventually happened to stumble across a meathead website called Testosterone Nation.
Oh, I
And
remember that.
yeah,
I was
tnation.com, right?
big into that. Yeah.
Charles Poliquin would write on
I
there,
I
Christian
took his
Thibodeau.
course.
Yeah, all these like really great strength and conditioning coaches would write, and there was really good nutrition info for gym rats. And so I started eating like a gym rat, and I started studying nutrition. And between going through puberty really, really hard and learning how to eat and lift and take control of my own health, etc., I lost 100 pounds. I'm now exactly 100 pounds or 102 pounds lighter than my heaviest weight at 15 at the age of 31. And,
Nice.
in those 16 years, I think I've experimented with any diet that I thought sounded different or interesting or had some sort of angle that I hadn't considered. I would try for anywhere between 4 months to over 2 years. And that's
Wow.
including intermittent fasting, the various versions of the paleo diet, low carb diets, carb timing diets, carb cycling diets. I was vegan for 2 years, and I did like whole food vegan as recommended by Dr. Michael Grieger. I did different versions of high carb, low fat. I did a lot of different variations of veganism. However, the one form of veganism that I didn't really get to try was a pure fruitarian approach. And this is where you come in to this equation, because you've been following a fruitarian diet, I understand, for over 3 years. You've been vegan for longer than that. And you kind of break all the stereotypes in terms of the if you don't mind me saying, the emaciated fruitarian stereotype that kind of tends to show up when people are looking at, raw vegans. Um, there's a tendency that the stereotype is advanced aging, and there's a few mechanisms that people suggest, cause that. But Bryan, how about you just tell us your own journey nutritionally? Obviously, is like right now you are unorthodox in terms of your approach to nutrition, right? In terms of you go quite a bit against the mainstream idea of what nutrition is, and even go against the convention of like even some fringe ideas of what healthy nutrition is. And what I'd love to hear is your journey to how you got to this point.
Yeah. First of all, thank you, Anthony, for creating this beautiful podcast, thinking outside the box. And I'm super stoked to be the first guest. I'm honored. It's really great. And yeah, let's start this off with a bang, right? Unorthodoxy. We're the outliers. My own friends call me an outlier. And they're like, well, you've always looked like that, being muscular. They're like, well, you've always taken care of yourself. So, whatever. They don't have an answer for it. I'm like, well, my journey started in 1969, and my mom smoked her whole pregnancy. And I was born, and then she didn't bottle feed me. She didn't breastfeed me. She bottle fed me. And then I lived with a smoker in a one-bedroom apartment in the Bronx for the first 18 years of my life. And I was always quote unquote sick. But now I look back on it and I realize that the sickness was my body constantly utilizing its immune function, which was to detoxify the body of acids, because I was breathing in all this junk. So my body was actually getting rid of it because that's what it's designed to do. And then when I was 14, I always looked like this. From the time I was 5 years old, my mom would say, Bryan, flex your muscles. So then I grew up with body dysmorphia because that always made me feel like I needed to look this way because that's how I got attention. So when I was 14, I started wrestling in high school, and um, I used to get on the scale. You had to weigh in the morning. So if I had to weigh 126 in the morning, I was only allowed to gain 3 pounds by the afternoon before the wrestling match. And I would get on the scale with a bowl of Captain Crunch cereal and milk, whole fat milk. And I'd get on the scale and I'd look at it and I'm like, all right, 3.1 pounds. I'm like, I could eat this. And then that's all I would eat. That was my nutrition when I was 14 years old in high school, right? On the day I'm supposed to wrestle. So I kept getting sick even in high school. So here I am working out really hard, pushing myself to the max, over breathing, which maybe we'll talk about, over breathing and creating an acid environment in my body by pushing myself too hard and putting in non-species specific food. Now, we need to talk about that for a second because you and I both love Gota. We're working with Flow Ops, and Gota is very famous and rightly so for saying that you're born Gota. Well, no child is born a meat eater or a vegetable eater. They don't eat that. They wouldn't eat it, right? But if you give them when they can chew, or even baby food, what is the baby food always spiked with? There's fruit in it. All our drinks around the world, all our pharmaceuticals, all the essential oils, they're always fruit spiked. And a baby is going to want fruit. So we start giving them baby food after the mother raises them. And if we want to talk about that, let's go back to the moment you're born. In the first 1 to 3 days, your mom's not producing breast milk. If you're lucky enough to get breastfed, she's producing colostrum. Just go Google it. And in colostrum, there's high amounts of HGH and proteins. But that's only the first 1 to 3 days. After that, the constituents of mother's milk are 2.5% protein, 4% fat, and something like 7 to 9% carbohydrates, which is sugar. So you're reared on sugar. But now I have to go even a little bit step before that. Now, we're not really reared on sugar. We're reared on biophotons, on prana, which is the breath, right? Because our stomach organs are redundant organs. They were literally developed because we started to eat. If you want to believe whatever you want to believe, I believe that at some point way back in the distant future, we were breatharians, all of us. And then once we started to eat fruit, which is the reproductive sex organ of the plant, we started to densify our body. And I forgot. So I was supposed to tell my story, so I'm going to get off that.
Just quickly
what
though,
happened?
there is a point of clarification I'd like to make. When you say in the distant past, are you talking about like humans at one point in the distant past were breatharian? Or because when you said that, where my mind went to was I was thinking, from an evolutionary perspective, where the earliest life forms on Earth were photosynthetic, and then over time there became this sort of evolution where they were starting to consume each other, and that was sort of the primordial life forms on Earth were photosynthetic, and that's sort of and obviously exchanging oxygen. Was that kind of what you were talking about, or do you think at one point in history humanity as a species was breatharian?
Well, if we came out of the ocean, we must have not eaten or drank for years and years and years and years. We had to develop our lungs, right? Our lungs had to be able to get rid of the water and then breathe air, just like mother's amniotic fluid. And your lungs are created in the amniotic fluid by breathing in feces and urine. So after you came out of the ocean, if that's really how it started, then long before we started consuming anything, we were breathing air. It just stands to reason that it would have taken millions of years for those adaptations to occur.
Mm.
Now, I don't believe in the law of evolution. I believe in the law of adaptability. And there's a book called Man's Higher Consciousness written by Hilton Hotima. And he talks about Charles Darwin's grandson, who was also a very prolific scientist. And the grandson says, my grandfather was amazing, but he forgot one thing, and that was the environment. So all these species start to mutate, but they're mutating because of their environmental signals, which is
Mm.
called epigenetics.
Mm-hmm.
So our DNA houses the blueprints of whatever capacity or capability we have. We're breathing in a signal, or we're eating a signal, or drinking a signal, and then the DNA unravels itself and it expresses the DNA in either a positive or negative way. Now, we weren't born meat eaters because no child eats meat. So the first thing your mom gave you was mostly sugar, and that's how you grew a bigger brain. So if we go back in the past, it's just hypothetical, right? We don't know. So I believe that we had to be breathing nothing but air. And once we started to figure out that we needed to eat, we were probably in Pangea, and it was more of a tropical climate, which is what the research says, is that way back when in Pangea, Earth was mostly tropical. And
Mm.
the trees that were growing didn't, no hominid went over to the leaf and started eating a leaf because it tastes bad. Who can eat raw kale? Who wants to eat raw spinach isn't so bad, but who's eating raw kale? Who's really enjoying vegetables that are raw, right? So the plant had to proliferate itself. And in its biological evolution, it created a fruit that has seeds in it. And then the fruit was enticing because they were beautiful, bright colors. And they had structured water in it. And structured water is the real godsend here, is that it's the fourth phase of water. It's in between liquid and solid. So it's a gel-like
Mm.
substance. And what else is a gel-like substance in your body? The two fluids in your body. You only have two fluids in your body. One is blood, one is lymph. And both of them, the blood is mostly plasma, which is gel-like, and lymph is all gel because it's your collagen and your reticulin and your elastin, and it's your lymphatic system,
Mm.
which is the fascial system, the extracellular matrix. So as above, so below. So you're going to be what you put in your body, right? Your body's going to emulate that. So we started eating structured water, and fruit has plenty of protein in it. I mean, could I be really big on fruit alone? I don't think so, but I'm also not willing to try anymore because I had that phase of my life
Mm.
where I was a power lifter and I squatted 622 pounds at 165-pound body weight, and I was a heavy carnivore. But so once we started to eat the fruits, we were eating nothing but sugar and getting the electrons from the sun, and our feet were on the ground. So we were in a symbiotic relationship with our feet on the ground, exposed to the sunlight, eating, having a symbiosis relationship with these trees that were feeding us our food.
Mm.
And that is an incredible, beautiful scenario of how we got started. And I didn't come up with that myself. I read that in a book called Return to the Brain of Eden by Tony Wright. And that man practiced with sleep deprivation, where he stayed up for more than 7 days. He did a sleep study in the UK, and they said, well, we're not going to let you stay up for 7 days, so you can only do 5. And he said, okay. He'd already been practicing, so he stayed up for 3 days before the study. And apparently, by the end of the study, he was ambidextrous. He was learning languages in an hour. His cognitive abilities went through the roof because your left brain and your right brain, separated by um, your corpus callosum,
Mm.
your left brain is delusional. And all you have to do is type in on Google Scholar, talk about left brain, right brain, and the left brain is all bad, so to speak. Yes, it gives us our ability to read, our ability to develop thoughts, but where do those thoughts come from? They come from a species that, in my opinion, has fallen from grace. like you said, we adapted to consume each other, and that probably happened because we know the continents have shifted. So there was a climatic change for the species that was living in the forest. So the species already had the brain to leave the forest and try to fend for itself. And then somehow it developed a tool, somehow it developed an ability to make that tool into a weapon and then eat this animal. But we didn't start that way. It's impossible. We started consuming marine phytoplankton, which is the first organism created by light, sound, and vibration, didn't consume the outside. It was living in the ocean. It was created by light, sound, and vibration. And when it took in whatever was taken into the cell, it had to produce waste. Because the first thing we do is produce waste. How do I know this? As above, so below. Because breathing, the neural drive to breathe is to breathe out. So the first thing I need to do is get rid of waste. But we're consumers. You just said it. We think we're all about consuming, but we're really supposed to get rid of obstructions in the interstitial spaces. So the marine phytoplankton would excrete waste, and then through a morphogenetic resonance of vibration, sound, light, vibration, it would bring the waste back into the cell and convert it into its own food, which we do too. We can live off in a fast, you can live off your ketones. So again, as above, so below. So the way I think about things is how we have been in this symbiotic relationship with Earth, and then we lost touch with what our species specific diet is. Because every other food besides fruit creates an insulin response, and it's sticky, and it's acid ash forming, and there are degrees of that. So now there's a big kick for the raw meat diet. Now, I would say either you eat fruit or you eat meat. I would actually say don't eat vegetables because the cellulose inside the vegetable, you don't have the enzyme to break down the cellulose. Forget about milk. That's terrible because you don't have the enzyme for that either. And again, the milk that you're drinking was designed for a baby cow. I don't care if it has constituents in the milk that people want to say is good for you. It wasn't designed for you. That's like basic freaking common sense. So the stickiness of the food creates stagnation in your lymphatic system. And
When
there's a
you say
very ancient
sticky,
science.
where does that stickiness manifest itself? Like, are you talking about the act? Like, you can actually feel how sticky a food is, and then that translates to what it's doing after you digest it and assimilate it into your body.
Very good question. When I go to the bathroom, Anthony, TMI, here it comes. When I when I clean myself, there's almost no residue on the toilet paper.
Hmm.
So that means that there's no residue inside my intestines and my colon. When I go off my diet, which is very rare, but once a year, I grew up in an Italian household, I'm going to have real pizza because I don't have 2,000 years to live and I'm going to enjoy myself. So I've been able to do it once a year. So August is coming and I'm going to have real pizza. And when I go to the bathroom, I don't go to the bathroom right away. It takes like a whole 72 hours for me to get my poop back to be healthy. And when I wipe myself, there's residue on the toilet paper. So all that gluten from the pastas, from the pizza, it sticks to you. So it's like taking clear nail polish and coating your intestines with clear nail polish. You don't see it, the nail polish hardens, then you put more of that gluten in your body, that cellulose in your body, and it just keeps creating layer upon layer upon layer, and it starts to soften the walls and allowing the bacteria to get out of the walls, and then people become, in essence, dirty. Disease can only breed in murky waters. So if I'm a human being and I have any kind of disease, then I'm breeding the disease because my body is murky. And that's called oxidative stress.
Mm.
So the body literally is rusting from the inside out.
Mm.
So if I clean the body, my cells will regenerate themselves. and I never finished my story, but I don't
Yeah,
think it was.
I was gonna say, like that was my next question. So how did you get from, holding a bowl of pre-weighed Captain Crunch and whole milk on the scale before before wrestling and like one of the things I like to do on the Art of Move podcast is kind of summarize some of the ideas that I hear and say them kind of differently or in a concise way. When you're looking at the sort of biological reasoning for how a human being is supposed to work, to eat, you're thinking about how, as a child, the constituents of breast milk are primarily sugar based, not protein and fat based. And so the constituents of, like, if a human being is designed to feed itself that way, then there's going to be some rationale that you should continue eating that way as an adult. Like, it's like, okay, if you can grow it, the most explosive phase of growth in your life, as a from a baby to a, to a child, into your adolescence, you're basically being reared on sugar. Then your whole life you should basically be reared on sugar. That's kind of what our bodies are designed to do. And
Yeah, specific kinds of sugar, right?
yeah, right,
Yeah,
yeah, because like you mentioned, other sugars like lactose in milk, we don't have the lactase enzyme to be able to digest and assimilate that. Even though it is a sugar, we can't break it down into the simple sugars. My
right.
understanding is like glucose and fructose are kind of the two main simple sugars that our bodies can use for energy. And even sucrose, which is white table sugar, is just I think it's a glucose and a fructose molecule, or two fructose
Yeah,
molecules in a glucose molecule. And you still have to digest table sugar to get that glucose and the fructose. And so these sugars are what the body runs on. Even when you fast, like you said, the human body can produce ketones to start, basically breaking down its own tissues. And what those tissues break down into are glucose, right? So even when you're low carb, your body is still turning your body into carbs. Like, it's just
that's right.
creating an expense, almost like an expensive metabolic process to create its own carbs from the inside out. So you're never really low
Right,
carb because your body is always trying to produce carbohydrates. That
right.
was a that was actually an aha moment for me too. The other thing that you're saying is that there are consequences to eating foods that are outside of the species appropriate diet, which you believe are fruit, because of how we evolved essentially, and what kind of made the most sense for us evolutionarily or adaptively to our environment when we came out of the ocean and became forest dwelling primates. um, it made the most sense for us to eat fruit. And then when we start eating foods that are outside of our species appropriate diet, and we'll get into the kind of the mechanisms of, you mentioned things like acid ash forming, and that's something that I want to talk about. I want to talk about the acidity of foods versus the alkalinity of foods, because that's something that I don't really understand very well. And a lot of people could probably hear that and not really kind of understand the nuance of it. So we'll get to that too. But what you're saying is there's the almost like a buildup that happens when you eat outside of the species appropriate diet. And
Yeah,
the more buildup that you have in your system, there are impacts on your blood, your lymph, your digestive tract in particular, though, has a tendency to coat itself. I found that really interesting too, because I had mentioned, I was vegan for over 2 years, and I suffered from like really bad digestive problems, and even like just lethargy, lack of energy, and even mental health challenges. And
mm,
one of the things that I sort of assumed was that I ate a lot of chickpeas and I ate a lot of lentils, because I was still an athlete. I was eating something like 4,000 calories a day. I ate a lot of grains to try and keep my protein levels up, and I developed what I thought was leaky gut syndrome, because whenever I
mm,
ate, like, no matter what it was, even if it was fruit, even if it was something like pure, my stomach would hurt. I would get bloated, and there was, like, I couldn't digest anything, and I was always low energy. And so, in my mind, I thought it was just eating, a quote vegan diet, that, you know, eh, I thought it was nutrient deficiencies, which it might have been, but it might not have been for the reasons that I thought it was originally. Because if I was, as you mentioned, either coating my digestive system, I know that the lectins in chickpeas and lentils can create leaky gut syndrome, which is basically where
yeah,
the membranous layer around your intestines become too porous, and you can actually have fecal matter pass into your bloodstream.
that's right.
And that destroys your health, that destroys your mood, that destroys everything about how you feel. I was thinking my mental health stuff was like a B12 deficiency possibly, which
Mm.
is a common vegan trope. It's like vegans often get B12 deficient. But it could have been just that I had shit in my bloodstream because had been accumulating like literal shit in my bloodstream because I'd been accumulating
That's
so
why,
much.
yeah.
Um, that's overview. That's kind of what I took in, because again, you have such this broad range of knowledge, and you don't just do this haphazard. You're not like, oh, I like fruit, I'm just going to eat fruit. There's like a deep reasoning behind your choices here, and I want to make sure that I'm really grasping all of that. So how did you go from the 14-year-old eating Captain Crunch to getting to that point?
Look, I have to just compliment you again, like I did in the podcast, The Art of Move. You are incredibly gifted at listening to information and being able to repeat it back perfectly. I don't know how you absorb everything so fast. I myself need more time with the information, and I have to keep listening, and I let it fester in my mind. But you're amazing with your ability to speak it out to the public. I mean, the people, the listeners must love listening to you. I mean, you're really
I
gifted
hope
at
so.
that. You have a knack for this.
Well, thank you so
So
much, Brian.
yeah, I mean, it's incredible. Well, I wrestled till I was 26. So from 14 to 26, all I cared about was being big and strong. And I started lifting weights when I was 13. So I just was constantly living in a linear fashion except for wrestling. And I was eating, I don't know, I think for 25 years, I probably had 6 to 8 eggs or egg whites every single morning of my life with cheese and potatoes. I was never really a bacon person. I gave that up long, long time ago because I knew that that fried bacon was probably terrible for me. Actually, when I was 17, I stopped eating processed foods. So for some reason at 17, I knew, okay, I'm never going to go to a fast food restaurant again.
Mm.
So since 17, I've never had McDonald's or Burger King or anything like that. And I gave up all processed foods. Thank goodness, right? Because as I tell you my story, you'll see that it gets worse. So when I was 26, I retired from my active wrestling career. And then I started working in a gym in Soho. It was one of the first independent personal training spots in New York, probably in the country. It was 1993. And my bosses were brothers, and they were both over 200 pounds, really strong. One of them was a wrestler, so we bonded really well. And they were enamored with me because I was already so strong. I was squatting like 400 pounds at the time. So then they were like, they turned me into a power lifter. So in order to be a power lifter at that moment in time, I thought I needed to take in as much protein as I could. So I would eat 8 egg whites every morning. Then my 2 meals during the day were 3 chicken breasts with a vat of rice with honey mustard. And then at night, I would go home and eat more chicken or more meat. And I was just constantly filling myself with these proteins that are indigestible. You know, I, I won't go off the track. So then after I was going to start talking about proteins, but
Mhm.
so
We will, and we
then
will.
So I did that till I was probably 39 years old. But by 39, my body was starting to break down. And I even go back to the time I was in my teens, all through my 20s. I was a very angry person. That had a lot to do with the stress I experienced with my upbringing. But I was very emotional, and I was aggressive because I believe that my sport that I chose put me into an aggressive posture that was also defensive. So chemically, my body was always in a state of fight or flight.
Mm.
And then that means the energy is constantly burning itself out with everything I did. So I was constantly stimulated by the foods I was eating, by the modalities of exercise I chose, which was wrestling and then powerlifting. So it was about being aggressive, being strong, being a
Mhm.
man, being as big as I could. And then I realized that women don't really like that. Who was I trying to be big for? I was trying to be big for my friends because my friends would hype me up. They're like, "You're the strongest mother effer on the beach." You know, I was jacked. I was 25 pounds heavier.
Mm.
And it was very ego driven and ego fun. And I got a lot out of that. But healthy, it didn't do anything good for me. So through my 30s, I also started to bring in drugs into my life. At 29, I'd never touched a drug in my life. I was a big time athlete, no pot, nothing. Well, alcohol. That is a drug. I have to say that. And I did start drinking at 13, but during wrestling season, I didn't drink. So from 0 to 39, I mean, I was living a life that most people live and just ingesting, consuming, not knowing that there was a taxation on my organs. And I went to the doctor every year and they would tell me I'm in good shape. Listen to my heart, take my blood. Oh, you're in good shape. So at 39, I started to break down. I mean, I always had joint pain. But at 39, I herniated 2 discs, S1, L5, really, really badly. Um, I had really bad insomnia. I would wake up every night in the middle of the night sweating. That's because my kidneys weren't functioning. So I wasn't getting into deep sleep, which means my brain wasn't secreting vasopressin, which keeps me asleep, which allows the healing to happen, the oxidation, the melatonin to come out. So basically, I was in constant fight or flight. My organs were failing, and I didn't know this until I turned 47. So almost 6 years ago. And then I worked with a chiropractor, but he never told me that things were wrong in my body because network chiropractors don't do that. So I've been with him for 10 years, but for the first 5 years, he never told me that I was in terrible shape. It wasn't until I got referred to an acupuncturist who was gifted, who said to me the first time I met her, she said to me, "Bryan, guys like you have a heart attack in your 60s and die." And I was like, "What?" This was at 47.
Mm.
I was like, "How could you say that to me? Look at me." But yet, all the telltale signs were there. I had IBS. I was constipated. I couldn't sleep. I was angry and emotional. I wanted to fight all the time. Bump me on the subway, and you're gonna get a mouthful, right? Because I was ingesting all these stress hormones, all this adrenaline. I was constantly stimulated by my diet, which through law of attraction made me choose events in my life that created adrenaline. I was an adrenaline addicted to adrenaline. And then the person I chose to have a child with and get married with didn't work out so well. And then the first 18 years of my child's life was an adrenaline addicted constant battle with this person who reminded me of my mother, right?
Mm.
We have to go into the subconscious. We can't just talk about health. We have to go into the subconscious of why people gravitate to these kinds of things. So
Mm.
my body was acidic. Now, how do I know that? I don't. There was no test for it. The doctor doesn't test your pH. They don't test your interstitial pH, the level of what your tissues, what is the medium, right? Who on this planet is going to jump into a septic tank? No one. But inside your body, your cells are living in a medium, and that medium can only be two sides of chemistry: alkaline or acid. It can't be anything else. So we have to start thinking on a deeper level of what I'm ingesting, what events I'm choosing, how I'm reacting to the world. Is that creating an alkaline state that my cells are living in or an acid state that my cells are living in? Because the medium of my body is my lymph, this viscous fluid. And if I can't remove the acids, then my body, my cells are in an acid state, and you gravitate to the acid state. It's why you can't get off the meat, off the coffee, because your body craves that acidity. And you think it's free will, but yet it's the decomposition of these foods that are lining your intestinal tract. So let's take me for an example. We know that the human body, of all the cells in your body, only 10% are human. We know this, it's a fact.
Mm-hmm.
That means that 90% of the other cells in your body are bacteria and viruses. We call it viral load and the human microbiome. So those bacteria are, even the bad ones, are conducive to me being healthy. But it should be 51% good, 49% bad, but the bad have a role to play. We need them. We can't get rid of all of them. We need them to ingest the chemicals and the toxins that come into our body. They live on that. So every animal on the planet, that means the same goes for them. So they have bacteria. So people are eating raw meat and raw fish without understanding that they're ingesting the parasites that live in those entities. So when I started with my acupuncturist and she told me that, she said to me, I said, well, can I heal myself? This is after a year because I wasn't really getting better. And she said, well, your kidneys aren't doing very well. Your spleen's not doing well. Your liver's not doing well. I'm like, oh my God. And I said, but I can heal, right? And she said, well, your blood's drying out, and at your age, it's probably not. You're just going to try to stop it from getting worse. And I was like, but I already healed my discs. I overcame 2 herniated discs. They grew back. It's like I never had any kind of pain. I was able to regrow them. So I said, if a starfish can regrow a leg and you could take out half of my liver and it grows back, then I can heal anything in my body. So I unfortunately stopped seeing her only because of that reason. I still think she's an absolutely gifted acupuncturist, but I needed to be in alignment energetically with somebody who believed I could heal. Mm-hmm. So I found an acupuncturist here in Chinatown in Manhattan, and he's a Qigong master. And when I went to him, I told him I was seeing somebody, and he gave me his assessment, and he said, this is 2 years later, he said very nicely, he said, I agree with her assessment. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. Like, I went vegan. I had been vegan now for 4 years, cooked vegan, didn't really understand anything about eating raw. So I was ingesting all these vegetables in my body, constantly bloated. I was still drinking coffee, constantly bloated, always, right? Didn't even understand that bloating meant that something was wrong in my digestive system. So I saw him for about 8 months, and then I started to learn about fruit. I read Return to the Brain of Eden. I found Professor Arnold Ehret's book, The Mucusless Diet and Rational Fasting. I found Dr. Morse, this man who's been doing this with people for 50 years in Punta Gorda, Florida. And I said, I'm going to start this. And I told my acupuncturist, and he said, I don't think you should do this. I said, why not? He said, because you need protein. I said, Dr. Ming, I've been vegan already for 4 years. I guess I never told you that. I said, I get my protein because I take marine phytoplankton, which is the building blocks of life. It has all the building blocks of life in every organism. It's got all the essential fats, all the essential amino acids, which are the building blocks that make proteins. So I'm of the belief that I don't need to put protein in my body. I just need all the essential amino acids. And if you look at me, you can see that that's the case with me. And so he said, okay, just make sure you eat a lot. So I said, okay, I'll eat a lot. So a month into it, now we started to see him every week because I realized, okay, I got to do something for my body. I need to go every week. Acupuncture is not a quick fix. It takes time. Chiropractic takes time. Massage takes time, right? So after a month, he listened to my kidney pulse, my liver, and my heart, and he said, ooh, this diet's working for you. You're changing rapidly. You should stay on it, and I'm learning from you. And that's what I loved. I was like, okay, he supports me because he sees the change in my organs, and that's really great. So that motivated me to stay on it.
Right.
So
and what was your protocol at that time?
I was, for the first 6 months, I had no cooked food whatsoever. I was fully eating fruits, berries, and melons. And then my last meal of the day would be guacamole on a raw food wrap because the detox from fruits can be very shocking to the body. And I was experienced with cutting weight from wrestling. So every single night I would start to get very hungry and I feel like I needed to eat something dense. So I would choose guacamole on a raw vegetable wrap.
Mm.
And that gave me a little bit of cellulose, which calmed my nerves down because the nerves are in the lymphatic system. So your nerves are floating in this viscous liquid like jello, and the metabolites, the acids, they collect on the nerves like little tiny pieces of lint. But that lint gets heavier and heavier and heavier, and then it compresses the nerve, which joins with the blood vessel. Nerves
Mm.
are with veins, and they're also with lymph. They run together. So all these metabolites, these acids, start to compress on these vessels that support flow of blood and lymph through your body. So when you're on a fruit diet, fruit is highly astringent and it pulls the acids. So people start to feel really bad and they're like, this diet isn't working for me. I went and I had a burger and I felt great
Mm.
because you're not stimulated when you're eating fruit because fruit doesn't require any insulin and it's easily diffused through the cell wall because it's a carbohydrate and every cell of your body, the membrane of the cell, which is the brain of the cell, that's why it's called membrane, not
Mm.
the nucleus. The nucleus houses the DNA, which are the blueprints. So the membrane has little antennas. And what is it looking for? Sugar molecules. So the antenna catches this sugar molecule and then it sends a message down into the nucleus. The nucleus tells the DNA to unravel, the telomeres unravel, the DNA unravels, and it unravels and gives you the program of the signal that the environment is that the cell is living in.
Mm.
And it's pretty fascinating, right? This is Dr. Bruce Lipton. This is epigenetics. And so I needed every night to feel some density because the pull was really tough, right? So my body was healing. And fruit is the only food that nurtures you and cleans you at the same time. It's the perfect neurochemistry for the brain because it emulates mother's milk. And it's a symbiotic relationship with the earth. So fast forward 7 more months, which is 8 in total of me being on that fruit diet. He said, Bryan, I have to tell you, he listened to my pulse. He said, I have to tell you that what you've done with your body is nothing short of remarkable. I've never seen anything like it. And remember, I told you I didn't think you should do it. He said, not only have you proven me that fruit can heal you, but you should keep going because you've reversed all of your kidney damage. Now, remember, I was told I would have a heart attack in my 60s and die because my kidneys were done. They weren't. Oh, my computer screen just went. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm still here. Yep, you're still good.
Okay, because my screensaver
Your
came off.
screensaver just went off. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, we're good.
Okay, good.
So you reversed this
So,
kidney damage.
and he said, you're now strengthening your primordial chi energy. And at your age, in my mind, that's impossible. And you're doing it. So now when I go to him, he's helping me to rebuild my energy. He says, you're getting younger. Every time I see you, you look younger. And, I'm about to be 53, and people are in shock at the way I look. And, a lot of it has to do with cleaning my body out and allowing my organs to regenerate themselves because you can regenerate everything in your body.
Hmm.
You have any
So when you
questions?
started this protocol, you were going through some pretty intense symptoms of, you said you were really hungry. You said the astringency of food pulls things out. And that's
I
like
was
if you ever have
defecating, couldn't believe.
mm,
I had no idea. I'm like, all I'm eating is water, really. And the poop was coming out of me like I was going to the bathroom 5 times a day, and I'm telling you, I was filling the toilet bowl because
mm,
you have pounds, 10 to 15 pounds of desiccated waste lining your colon and organs and intestines that stays with you forever because you keep putting the bad stuff in your body and your body has no time to digest and remove the food because we're eating 3 to 6 times a day, right? And we're not supposed to be eating that much. So continue with your beautiful
So
summation.
yeah, so you were experiencing these symptoms, and the way that you this is kind of interesting to me, because I remember I tried to do a raw vegan diet at one point, or I tried to do like a raw till four, back when, it was like 2000, and I'm gonna say 15 or 16 or something. It was quite a while ago, almost like 5 or 6 years ago, and I was watching like Durian Rider and Freely the Banana Girl. So it'd be like you'd eat raw vegan diets to a certain point, and I would try eating a bunch of raw grapes, and it would feel good, but then I would get this incredible, horrible stomach ache for like half an hour,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
like
That
unlike
happened to me in the
anything.
beginning. Yeah.
And I couldn't figure out, I was like, what is going on? And it was really weird because it would go away. Like the cure that I found for it was I would have a small tablespoon of peanut butter. And as soon as I
Mm.
ate peanut butter or like something with fat in it, it would within 60 seconds, it would stop completely. And I
Right.
never figured out why. I couldn't figure out like why that was happening to me, because I could eat grapes outside of the context of everything else, right? Like I was like, I could eat fruit, I could eat all this stuff, but as soon as I tried to eat it on its own, on an empty stomach especially, I would get this horrible pain in my stomach, like fetal position for half an hour, and I never really understood why. And it's sounding like, if this is the case, that you eat fruit and all of a sudden it's pushing against all this gunk and it's freeing up all this stuff that hasn't moved around a lot, then your system's having a hard time clearing it. That's kind of,
Yeah.
that sounds really
Yes.
painful. So
Yes.
so
That happened to
the
me with
way.
grapes too.
Mm, and was it grapes specifically? Was it other fruit that happened
No, it
with you
was
as well,
grapes
or?
specifically. Grapes are
Mm,
the most astringent, right? If you want to cure cancer, you live on grapes for 40 days
mm,
and you'll cure cancer because you just
wow.
clean out the fungus in your body.
So how much were you eating? Your acupuncturist recommended that you ate a lot of food, and I know you don't eat a ton of food now, from
Right.
just based on looking at your Instagram page and seeing, I think you eat 2 meals a day plus the marine
Three.
phytoplankton of
Three.
three
Yeah.
meals a day, right?
Yeah.
But 3 meals a day of just fruit, right? That's, when you look at, because everyone's obsessed with calories in, calories out, it's not a huge amount of calories. And your weight is, obviously, I scrolled your whole Instagram, man. Your weight has looked stable the entire time. Your body composition hasn't changed a tremendous amount, right? Just eating this way of living. So when you first went on this diet, and you were like, you felt like this need for avocado and a raw wrap and this denser, heavier food. How much were you eating throughout the day, and what do you think was happening in your body? Um, like you said, you were defecating a lot, but how much food were you actually consuming?
Before the avocado, I was having 5 meals. I was eating like every hour.
Hmm.
Every hour, I was eating some form of fruit. And I was always trying to change my fruits. Now I eat mono fruit. I wasn't combining fruits. I mean, when I eat only one type of fruit
Hmm.
because if you mix fruits, they also become acidic in your body.
Hmm.
Because when the hominid was scavenging the earth, you didn't have an orange tree next to a blueberry bush. There were orchards. Then you'd have to walk miles to find the next orchard. So mono eating, and that includes meat. If I were going to be a carnivore again, I would never eat it with vegetables. I would only
Hmm.
eat meat. That's best for the body, is to just consume one type of food. Um, so I would eat 4 or 5 times a day, and then at night I'd have 2 avocados on that raw food wrap, no salt. Like I'm completely against salt. The electrolytes in your body come from calcium. You don't need outside electrolytes.
Hmm.
You need calcium, and you get plenty of that in marine phytoplankton, which also has chlorophyll. And the chlorophyll gives me all the B vitamins I need. So my body's literally assimilating its own B vitamins because of the marine phytoplankton, right? It's really a godsend, and it's like the secret ingredient, I think, for me, for health. So the reason I was feeling the need to eat the avocados at night is because even after eating 5 meals, and I would say I would eat I would eat like 4 oranges in the morning. Then I'd have some watermelon. Then I would have a few peaches and plums. And then I would have like a bag of cherries, and I would still feel hungry because I was in major detox because there was no insulin being secreted. So my body was in constant detox, and it took a lot of energy out of me. So by the end of the night, I would feel exhausted. And then once I ate the guacamole, I'd feel better because the guacamole has PUFAs, polyunsaturated fats,
Hmm.
and that stopped my nerves from being overactive. So it stimulated my body to make insulin. And really, we're addicted to the stimulation of eating.
Mm.
We're addicted to a lot of things, but people would never think that eating is actually an addiction because you need the stimulation of the salts and the fats and the proteins. We're just taught from an early age that, well, we need them right macronutrients. But no, you're addicted to adrenaline, you're addicted to cortisol because whatever animal you kill or fish you eat, it comes with a price, right? And in my mind now, I mean, I haven't eaten flesh in 10 years and I don't need to experiment. I've done it. I know that the experimentation didn't work well for my body. It was dying. So I will never go back to flesh because
Mm.
I will never do that. I mean, it's already been 10 years. I'm way over it.
Yeah. It's obviously working for you too, right? And that's so in terms of detox symptoms, when did you stop feeling that sort of exhaustion at the end of the day? And when did you start feeling energized by that? Because obviously you're not doing, people when they start new diets, and I know this is true of me too. Um, when I was a personal trainer and I would get people to get on new diets, I would always say give it 2 weeks at least because your body has to adapt to a new source of fuel or whatever it happens to be, and you'll start to feel better. And then once you've adapted, you're going to feel that much better, but you might feel shit at first, right? And
Right.
that was always when I was doing diet experiments. That's why I would always try, like, my minimum was a month, but that was like me negotiating a minimum. I would always try to do something for 3 months at least to really get a firm grasp of like what it's like to be on a lifestyle consistently and have my body adapt to it. So how long did it take you? What other sort of symptoms did you experience? What other detoxing symptoms did you have? And how long did it take you to kind of clean yourself out and feel like you're energized by your nutrition again?
Yeah, a full year.
Mm.
And what I would do is I started to get sick of the guacamole. My body started to reject it. I started to actually get bloated from it. And then I thought, was I bloated all the time? And I just didn't realize it because I needed that stimulation. So I wasn't aware of the inner feelings. So when I started to get bloated from it, I stopped eating it because I realized that it's not good for me. And then my body, but that was an inner awareness, an innate awareness I had that I didn't have before that. So then I switched to just eating bananas. So instead of being in constant detox at night, I wanted to get out of the detox, so I would eat bananas with pumpkin seed butter. So two fruits, but again, mixing the fruits creates a little bit of acid, creates a little bit of stickiness, but it gets me out of the detox. And then I started experimenting about a year and a half into it. Then I started experimenting with long term mono fruit fasts. So I did 12 days of grapes, I did 10 days of watermelon. Recently, I just did 9 days of sumo oranges. And then I've also been incorporating fasting. I do intermittent fasting. So I don't eat for at least 16 hours because you don't
Mm.
get the benefits of autophagy really until after the 14th hour, as science tells us. So I'm really only in autophagy for 2 hours. So I'm continuing to scour the body, scouring and getting rid of the acids. But it's going to take 10 years. At my age, with everything I put in my body, all the acids, it's going to take 10 years. You know, hell, again, it's like the murkiness, right? The
Mm.
acids are flooding our bodies. It's impairing our ability to maintain proper health. And acid in the system disrupts balance, causing your red blood cells to stick together. They weaken and they die. And when this happens, more acid is released into your bloodstream. And this, it's like the leaky gut. It's causing a vicious and deadly cycle of pollution, the oxidative stress. So the body tries to compensate by calling upon its alkaline reserves, but eventually these are depleted and acid wreaks havoc. Why people get cancer, diabetes, and it burns through
Mm,
your arteries. And then again, the body tries to compensate by lining the artery walls with cholesterol. That's why people's cholesterol goes up. Cholesterol isn't a bad thing, it's an emergency system. When somebody has high cholesterol, it means there's an inflammatory response happening in the body, and the body's making cholesterol to protect your arteries, but it winds up being a deadly solution because that's
mm,
the body's emergency system. It'll never get better from that. It's just an emergency system trying to keep you alive longer,
mm.
right? So if we always go back to the root, it's inflammation. So we need to get rid of inflammation.
So one of the things that one of the listeners from when we did the Art of Move, you briefly touched on the topic of your nutrition. And one of the things that one of our listeners wrote into me, and he said, I thought that the body will regulate its own blood pH level, like it regulates its own pH so that it doesn't get too acid or too alkaline. And what you're saying is that like there is, yes, it does do that, but the fact is that it
Mm,
taxes the body in order to regulate itself. And so if you're constantly bombarding the system over and over and over again with these foods or these inputs that require that basically create an acidic environment, it has to work
yeah,
on overtime to clear that and regulate itself
yeah,
to that alkaline level. And after a while that the system is so taxed, the system becomes inflamed, the system, experiences the issues that it experiences, and it won't be able to
yeah,
keep up with returning
yeah.
to that baseline level of alkalinity that it wants to. So what are some of the mechanisms? So, let's use meat as an example because a lot of people think, and even myself, right? Like when I quit veganism, I went back to eating. I fasted for 2.5 or 3 days. And then I ate nothing but bone broth for 2 days. And then I started eating nothing but meat and vegetables. And then I eventually just started cutting out the vegetables. Right now, I've been really influenced by other nutritionists like Paul Saladino, who's like the carnivore MD, and a lot of like in the last episode, you talked about nutrient density of organ meats doesn't really matter as much because of the process that the body has to take to digest these organ meats.
Right.
And so
Well,
then,
think about it. You just said dense, right? There were two words, nutrient dense. So the more dense it is, the more energy my body has to make to break down to get to those nutrients.
hmm,
So are the nutrients healing me, or is the energy expenditure to get to those nutrients hurting me?
hmm. And so could you, in theory, provide adequate amounts of energy for your body to break down those nutrients and it would have a benefit? Or let's use meat as the example digestively. Because you talked about gluten and certain grains and certain things coating the system, right? And oftentimes I hear even, Dr. Robert Morse, I read his book. I read a few of the books that you recommended before starting
Nice.
this podcast. And, some of the like obviously meat is pretty looked down upon, but digestively, what is happening to meat? What does it do to your system, in your understanding, and how will it affect you long term?
Well, it creates acidity in the gut because proteins are unnatural. Again, like Gouda. We're born Gouda. We're not born meat eaters. No child eats meat. No child is gravitating to eating meat. That's, for me, that's a sign. So when you eat something, it can only go one of two ways, alkaline or acid. So meat's going to go in acid because the body's got to secrete a lot of insulin. It's got to make a lot of digestive enzymes. It's got to utilize its digestive enzymes.
Mm,
And you're only born with a certain amount. So the pH of anything you eat or drink is really irrelevant in human physiology. Like your listener said, your body regulates its own pH, and it's through carbon dioxide. So if what I'm eating is becoming acid, then my carbon dioxide levels are lowering because my body is burning more oxygen to fuel or to put out the fire inside the gut. So it's got to burn oxygen off And if there's no carbon dioxide present, because we've speeded up our breath, because Professor Ehret says we're air gas engines, right? And the more dense we are, the faster we breathe. And we know this with heart rate variability now, that it's intimately connected. My diaphragm is one fabric with my heart. It's fascially connected to my heart, my pericardium. So if I'm eating a diet that, now everybody who eats knows when they eat too much, they don't feel good. They feel bloated. And you also know that it's hard to breathe. So all that food is sitting and crushing the diaphragm, which makes your breath come up higher. So it becomes shallow and it becomes rapid. When it becomes shallow and rapid, we off gas carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide is the regulator of pH in the body. So if there's no carbon dioxide present, I'm either going to be too alkaline or too acid. Either way, that means I'm without oxygen, which means either way, I'm dying a slow death. But we don't know that because we're not a car. We don't have a light that says, oh, ding, 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 your body's too acid right now. You know, do something that's going to make it less acid, or your body's too alkaline. We don't know this, right? So, you know, too little CO2 and you're alkalytic, too much and you're acidic, and then you're breathing at a specific pace, and it's trying to manage your central chemoreceptors, which are the balance between oxygen and carbon dioxide, and they're located at the base of the brainstem, which manages and restores your blood pH. So the acidity of the food you eat in your stomach creates more acidity, which speeds up your breathing, which lowers carbon dioxide, which makes the blood acidic. So the food can actually distort your breathing mechanics, and then your breathing mechanics make your body either too alkaline or too acid. And the biochemical aspect of breathing is all about gas exchange, right? Because at the blood level, it's gas, it's not liquid. So that's really important to understand. There's so many things involved, like you and I talked about last podcast, where again, we're a synergistic, you know, we call these things systems, but it's really just one entity. And all these systems have to work in cohesiveness. They have to be synergistic with every other system in the body. And if one system is off, the whole body is off.
Or
You
like a
know, your
system of
body's going to
systems.
compartmentalize.
Yeah, because there is no, like, I mean, if you take out your circulatory system, none of the other systems are going to take out your respiratory system. Take out any of the systems, the rest of the systems are just going to kind of fall apart, right? And
Right.
that's like
And
the
it,
real.
and if yeah, if we don't have carbon dioxide in our body, we don't have enough soluble oxygen. And soluble oxygen carries a positive electron. Oxygen goes into the mitochondria. So the more oxygen available in my system without having to go to put out the acids in my body, the more electrical charge I have. So when you're eating fruit, again, you're eating sunlight. They're called biophotons. There's electrical energy in living food. But your experience with a vegan diet was because vegetables are not species specific and they were creating acidity in your body. So, yeah, I don't agree with that either. But when you eat, that's why I would actually agree with either an all fruit diet or an all carnivore diet. Now, I know there's a guy out there somewhere that does half fruit, half carnivore, and apparently he's really thriving. People try to turn me on to these people, but I don't I mean, you're running a podcast, so you have to go and look at these things. I'm not really interested in eating meat. I'm never going to experiment again because I already see the difference. And through what I've done with my body, I know that if I brought meat back into my body, would I feel better? No, I'd be stimulated. And ultimately, I think that it would cause a taxation on my kidneys. And over time, it would create stagnation in my lymph. Now we go back to iridology. If you get your iris read, you'll know whether or not your food is causing you harm because it takes years for something to go wrong. So your iris is a complete map of all 700 lymphatic vessels in your body. And I've had my irises read, and the guy looked in my eyes and told me everywhere on my body that hurt. And I was like, how did you do that? Because he could see. He can see where you're stagnant. right? And
Mm,
he even told me about my history with my mother and my father, and he was dead on because it's also emotional. Because emotional stress creates acidity in the body
mm,
and stagnation. So there are ways to determine whether or not the diet that makes you feel good is actually doing good for you or not. And again, my example is I could snort a line of cocaine and feel great. Doesn't mean it's good for me.
mhm.
I can eat raw liver and raw heart and feel great. Doesn't mean it's good for me. Not my species specific diet. And do you know whether or not it's creating acidity in your body? Do you know whether or not it's creating lymph stagnation? So, you know,
So for a person who wants to, let's say they're, between the age of 25 and 50, right? And they're like, all right, I've spent my lifetime, I'm sold. This sounds really interesting, and I want to experience that health, that lightness. I don't want to be full of crap and coating in my system, and I want to feel good. But I'm kind of afraid, and I don't really know where to start.
hmm,
Obviously, people are, and by the way, the iridology thing, I just as a total aside, like, I've heard that people's eye color change when they do raw vegan diets for prolonged periods of time. So your eye color literally changed after years of doing this, hey?
mine's
Which is,
changing now.
and I never realized that that was the reason. It was like your iris actually has a connection to your lymph. So that's very, very,
Yeah.
very fascinating. Um, how would a person who is very curious about this lifestyle, how would you go about helping them transition to it? What's the first starting point, and what can they expect to have to deal with as they transition into this lifestyle?
Well, it really depends on what their diet is and how many antibiotics they've taken in their life and how many
Mm,
medications they're either on or have taken. Because the first thing you need to do is get your iris read
mm,
because there would be a transition. If you're very, very stagnant in your lymph and you can't go fruitarian right away, it literally could be very detrimental to you because the detox will release so much acids into your system that it can disrupt your physiological functions. So you
mm,
have to transition. Now, I didn't know about this. And 7 years ago, when Juice Press opened in Manhattan, I started to live, I wanted to become vegan. So I lived on juices, but fruit juices and vegetable juices for 2 straight years. I didn't eat, I didn't even know I was raw vegan and I wasn't eating cooked food. So I kind of transitioned without knowing it. And that really helped me. And then for most people, the thing is, again, you can't just start a fruitarian diet because if you've been on a heavy meat diet and grains and milk, you can get very sick. You will not feel good. So off the cusp, you could start with 2 or 3 meals a day of watery fruits and then continue your lifestyle at night.
mm,
Always make your last meal a dense one. And then do that for a long period of time, for at least 6 months, but don't do don't have more than one meal of the meal that you want. Allow the body to get used to the fruit over time, and then you're going to start to notice that all of a sudden you're not craving that food anymore. All of a sudden you're like, well, I notice when I eat fruit in the mornings I feel really good, and then at night when I do that meal I feel really tired and lethargic. Then your body's going to, that's because it's physiologically rebalancing itself, the pH at the interstitial level, and cognitively you will start to gravitate to a food that's better for you, because that's
mm,
what's happened to me now. Now I'm gung ho. I mean, once in a while I eat cooked food. I
mhm.
never really feel good after it, but once in a while I allow that into my body. But I immediately go back to fruit, and I always feel really good when I'm eating fruit.
Mm.
So
So
the
yeah.
transition is very important. I recommend reading The Mucusless Diet by Professor Arnold Ehret,
Mm,
and very much so having your iris read by a qualified iridologist
mm.
and an
Right.
acupuncturist because they're looking at your tongue and they can see the state of your organs.
Mm. Right. So this is a lot of, if you've never experienced like alternative medicine or classical Chinese medicine, these are all really cool approaches that will help you get different insights than the allopathic medicine that we experience in the West, right? And
Yeah.
even hearing, so hearing based on your prescription, obviously it would be like, this isn't something you just jump into after listening to a podcast. It's like, yes, this
No,
could sound really cool, but you're gonna need some help
yeah,
along the way. This isn't just
yeah.
something that, like, I experimented with keto diets and fasting and stuff, like, and I was able to
Anthony,
go.
I had a watermelon before this. Can I run to the restroom?
Yeah, go, please run to the bathroom. Please run to
Thank
the
you.
bathroom. And I'll just do a little recap here for the audience. I have been able to experiment with a lot of different diets because they don't come with detoxing symptoms. Fasting might have been the only exception where, I would do several prolonged fasts and I would feel good and I'd feel crummy and I'd feel good and I'd feel crummy back and forth. But this is the, just transitioning to straight eating fruit apparently comes with quite a few medical downsides, especially if you don't know what you're doing. So having additional support outside of just listening to a podcast for an hour is probably a better idea. Go see an acupuncturist, go get your iris read by an iridologist, transition slowly, and don't think in terms of like you can just do this overnight, it sounds like, because I'll be honest, like I'm very, very tempted to try and just do this overnight as well, despite the fact that I've been eating meat, fruit, honey, and then the occasional junk food once in a while for the last however many years, right? Like like you might be tempted to want to jump into this right away, but just because you listen to the podcast, maybe get the extra support and talk to other medical professionals or alternative medical professionals before you're trying this.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
because it
I
sounds
also I do health appointments for people. I
mm,
do 30, 60-minute health appointments, and I help them along with that process.
okay. And if they want to book that, can they do that through your Instagram page or?
Yes.
Yeah, so at Tensegral Breathing is Bryan's Instagram page. If you want to follow him, he is definitely worth following. It because it sounds like, like for me, if I started just eating nothing but fruit, like I said, I eat a lot of organ meats and ground meats, and even though I get them from a local farmer and I get them as clean as possible, quote unquote, I'll never eat a factory farmed animal. And I'll never eat, an animal that's pumped full of hormones and antibiotics and all this stuff. Like, and I try to be as local and conscientious as possible with my meat consumption and egg consumption and like really any animal based food that I was eating. Try to be very conscientious. It sounds like that if I was just going to start, switching to a diet of apples tomorrow, I'd get pretty sick. It is what it
Well, we
sounds
don't know that, but possibly, yeah.
right. And so like detox symptoms, what are some detox symptoms that people can go through when they're trying this lifestyle?
Developing colds.
Mm,
You get colds. So people would think, oh, I got bacteria or I got a virus. No, it's the acids that are being released into the lymph. So the body has to remove it through the nose, through the throat,
mm,
diarrhea. I had bouts of diarrhea in the beginning too. I'd be
mm,
pooping really well. All this poop would come out, and then all of a sudden I'd have diarrhea without
hmm.
pain.
Yeah.
And that's because all that mucus was stuck in my colon and my intestines, and the mucus came out, right? Headaches could happen, right? Um, Too much energy. It was hard for me to
Mm,
sleep at first because I was loaded with high energy from the fruit,
mm,
and it was hard for me to sleep. So my body started to have to sleep less, but I felt great. I was like, okay, I'm only sleeping 4 hours a night. And then what I neglected to mention too with my acupuncturist is that was 2 years and a half ago when my kidneys finally healed themselves. But only 12 weeks ago did he tell me that I'm now out of adrenal stress.
mm,
So for 3 years, I've still been in adrenal stress because my kidneys were toxified and not doing well. So that means my adrenals, which sit on top of my kidneys, weren't. So
mm,
actually, over the last 3 months, I've now been sleeping more than I've ever slept in my life. So I was sleeping 4 or 5 hours a night on the fruit, and now I'm sleeping like 6 to 7 hours, which
mm,
is crazy, but I'm getting really good sleep now because I'm not stimulated anymore. And my adrenal glands have healed themselves. And because I have this very unique breathing routine I do all the time, I now believe that it's because my blood is at the right pH level. So my blood is in balance, which means everything in my body is in balance. And now I'm really starting to flourish. I'm really starting to have some profound things happen to me on the chiropractor's table, when I'm doing breath holds, when I'm just in meditation, right? Because I've removed the acid and the stimulation, and now I'm getting into that subtle mind. I'm not living
Mm,
in my lower brain anymore, which is consumption, which is contributing to the suffering of something else, some other entity. I just don't believe that that's something I ever want to contribute to.
of course. And so you have a pretty unique routine that obviously you include the marine phytoplankton. Your breathing has a great deal to do with the assimilation of the energy that you have into your body. And a stereotype that fruitarians tend to get pinned with is this emaciated look or this advanced aging. So why do you think that you're flourishing on the fruitarian diet while other people kind of experience this like intense weight loss or this lack of energy or even this advanced aging? I remember a lot of people would sort of say that glycation, the process of glycation from the excess fructose of eating only fruit was it's this sort of DNA damaging process that your body goes through. That was the speculation. But then you look at yourself and you're aging in reverse, eating nothing but fruit and marine phytoplankton. um, you've also told me in other conversations that we've had that you think that in if you didn't take the marine phytoplankton, you'd be just as rocking health wise and feel just as good. So what do you think the difference is, or where do you think fruitarians go wrong in their lifestyle, and why do you think they end up in this sort of like almost emaciated stereotype?
Well, it's hard to say because that's kind of a generalization. I would need to know what the emaciated people, how they were eating their fruit. Because again, if
Mm,
they're eating oranges and melons together, that's creating acidity in the body. That's not good for them. So if they're mixing their fruits, right, then that can actually do just as much harm to the body. Because fruits, when they're mixed together, become very acidic
mm,
because they are acid in nature, but yet they go in the body alkaline. So that means they're creating a lot of acidity. And most people, they they don't want to eat mono meals. Most people, they've never grown up that way. And I'm so now programmed programmed myself that I only eat mono meals. I mean, I had watermelon right before you as the first thing I had today. So I went 17 hours without food.
mm.
And then when we're done, I'm going to eat muscat grapes and I'm going to have bananas for dinner. So those
Nice.
would be my 3 meals. But I think that the reason that, if again, I need to know what's going on, but their reason could be the fact that they're mixing their fruits or they're not absorbing their nutrients because their kidneys weren't actually healthy yet. And I don't know about this advanced aging. I don't know anybody who's looked advanced aging just living on fruit. I would be very skeptical of that.
Yeah, maybe it's not. Maybe that's more of a raw vegan stereotype, right? And like you get
Mm,
there's like a YouTube influencer named Fully Raw Christina that was like really heavily criticized for advanced aging, and you just get anyone who's anti-vegan will pull up it's the stereotype, the signs of vegan deterioration, advanced aging, and just seeing how like the before and after of when the person started. But it's not. I guess it's not specifically fruitarian. Actually, now that you say
yeah,
that, because
it wouldn't be.
even
No
the in,
way.
even the influencer that I'm thinking of is drinking like these juices with a ton of vegetable juices and mixing a ton of different things and making these big fruit salads and not necessarily eating mono
Yeah.
meals. And so in terms of acid forming foods, obviously mono eating fruit would be the best. um are there cooked foods that are not acid forming, or are pretty much all cooked foods by default going to be sort of have a negative influence on your digestion and health?
Yeah. All cooked food has a negative influence on your digestion and health because it sparks the body's immune response.
Hmm.
Now, your immune system is not your white blood cells. it's your red blood cells, because there's 5,000 red blood cells to every one white blood cell. And red blood cells carry oxygen, and oxygen heals everything. So your immune system is your red blood cells. So when you eat a cooked meal, your body will secrete, make white blood cells, because it's got to try to get rid of the acidity. It feels it's under attack.
Hmm.
So that's why when people get white blood cell counts, I would imagine mine is very, very low. I don't know what it is, but I had my blood work done a year and a half ago from Life Extension, and not one marker was out of balance. The only marker that he didn't like, there were three, was number one, my sugar levels were right at the top. So whatever the ratio was, 8.0 to 11.0, I was like 10.9.
Hmm.
And then I told him I was a fruitarian. He goes, okay, well, that makes sense. And then my protein levels were also at the bottom, but still in the range.
Hmm.
And he looked at me and he said, well, I guess that doesn't matter because he saw what I looked like. And the third thing was, in Life Extension, they believe that you need free testosterone in your body to stay young. Well, in Return to the Brain of Eden, Tony Wright talks about testosterone. The reason we grew bigger brains was when we were in the forest, we were eating these fruits that were the perfect neurochemistry for the brain. The fruit is what grew the brain to begin with. It delayed puberty. It kept us in a more juvenile state. And if you're in a juvenile state, you're happy. You don't contribute to aggression.
Hmm.
So he talks about your free testosterone being bound. So the guy said, your testosterone levels are through the roof. They were 982. For a 51-year-old man, that's insane. Except, he said, most of it is bound. And in Life Extension, we don't like that. We want to get you on the supplement, Super Myra Forte, that would help you unbind your testosterone. And I said to him, that's actually what I'm shooting for. I'm shooting to keep my testosterone bound so I can grow a bigger brain and have less aggression. So I can actually move into the higher dimensions of the energies that are coming onto the planet, so I can be the change that I seek in the world. So I don't really wrestle anymore. And I don't, and I live in New York City, and like I said, I used to get angry at people on the train. Well, I made it all through COVID, or I shouldn't say that. And I never wore a mask on the subway because I'm a breathing instructor, and I know that my breathing can actually prevent me from any kind of respiratory illness. It's a fact. So I never wore a mask, and there were a lot of people who got very angry at me, and I never said a word back. I would just look at them and just look at them, and not give them any anger back. And I realized that, wow, I've changed, because they can't control my environment. If I allow myself to react to their whatever, then I'm only hurting myself, and then my cells will actually contract. Stress causes exosomes to be released from the cells, and that's stress on the body. And then your cells contract. There's no growth. So I realized that, man, I'm in a really good peace of mind. And I believe it's because my testosterone is bound, but obviously I am getting younger because my stem cells that I were born with don't have any obstructions in the way anymore. There's less acids than there were before. So now my stem cell can go up to that nerve cell and be like, look, hey, buddy, wake up. Here's the information you need to wake up. And I know that it's only going to continue to get better because it's been 3 years and 2 months already. So I know that when I'm 60, I'm going to, people are just going to be like, oh my God. I know it's only going to continue to get better because every time I go to my acupuncturist, he says, listens to my pulse, and he says, better, you're getting better. And I was like, that's validation. Not just how I'm feeling. It's actually validation from a doctor who's a gastroenterologist trained for 20 years, who left it, became an acupuncturist. And then I get validation from my chiropractor. And when I get my irises read, there's constant improvement. My eye color is changing. He told me I was born with green eyes. I'm like, I've never had green eyes. He said, what was your mother's history? I said, she smoked her whole pregnancy. He said, she gave you her dirty lymphatic system. She
Hmm.
started smoking, she was 13. She had me at 25. So apparently, when I clean out, my eyes are going to turn green, and they are getting lighter.
Hmm. It's extremely interesting. It's extremely interesting. So, Bryan, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your journey and sharing your unique perspectives. If someone wants to embark on this journey, don't think of it in terms of how I used to think of it, in terms of like a 3 or 6 month experiment or even a 2 year experiment. This sounds like a long term commitment to really digging in and not just changing how you eat, but looking at your whole system, working with other health practitioners to kind of get the entire system understood better, cleaned out, having better contact with that's a huge undertaking for anyone. And I think it's really cool that you're a living example of just how, with this unorthodox approach and with this conscious approach to how you are looking at your body as a system that cleans itself out and that does respond very adversely, even subtly, even if you're not noticing it, even if it takes you years and years and years for these accumulations to show up in your system, that you really strongly believe that there's a species appropriate diet, which is fruit, and that humans are frugivores by nature, that by
Yeah.
eating this way and allowing your system to clean out and return to this natural state. And again, this is the you teach in your breathing course, you teach the baseline breath, right, which is the baseline of how we should be breathing. You practice go to movement, which if you listen to the Art of Move podcast, you'll hear about a lot, which is the sort of baseline way that nature intended our bodies to move biomechanically. And if humans are frugivores, then eating fruit, in theory, should be the baseline nutrition for human beings, right? If you wanted to take it even farther back, right? Humans could even be like I think a lot of fruitarians kind of embark this with the sort of goal of gradually moving towards a breatharian lifestyle where they don't even have to eat the fruit. They can just, hang out in the sun and take the deep breaths and convert their own energy.
Yeah.
And
I'm
that's
nowhere ready for that.
yeah, and so that's this I think the big takeaway, aside from the incredible information that you gave and the really unique perspectives, this isn't like a hippy dippy approach to like, oh, it's just fruit and it's high vibration, man. Like there's some serious reasoning behind this that you've considered and you've studied and you've experimented with and you've experienced firsthand. And if anyone wants to start kind of edging towards this sort of a lifestyle, don't just jump into it because you listen to the podcast with us. Please reach out to Bryan, do a 30 or 60-minute consultation with him. Your website is quantumfitness.com.
Org.
.org, right? So quantumfitness.org. You can check out Bryan's breathing programs. Again, his Instagram is at Tensegral Breathing, which is an amazing page full of great videos that he has, really good resources. And I would highly recommend checking out both his breathing course, and if you want to set out on this fruitarian lifestyle experiment and start kind of a longer term commitment to cleansing out your system and experiencing better health through that, then maybe book even a consultation with him and go down
Mm.
that route. So Bryan, thanks so much for doing this first episode with me. I feel like we started out with a bang. This is such a unique approach that you don't see many people doing, but I had to have a more in-depth conversation with you about it because seeing you thrive with it is just phenomenal. And I wanted to, dig more into why you do it. So thank you again for
Thank you.
doing this with me.
Thank you so much, Anthony. Thank you for having me. And I do want to throw out there, we forgot to talk about that. My wife isn't even vegan,
Yeah.
and she eats her lifestyle, and I eat mine, and we both support each other. Neither one of us mind. And that's really a beautiful thing, is that
Hmm.
we can actually live together and be happy eating completely different lifestyles.
And that is something because, I have been vegan with people who have not been vegan, and I've been very close friends with people who are vegan when I have not been. And I think, there is an art and a science to being able to just accept and live and let live, and to really so I think that's phenomenal too. I can imagine we're gonna have more conversations about this because in
Mm.
an hour and a half, I still somehow manage to feel like we only scratch the surface. It's obviously nutrition and the human system is a very deep and extensive topic. So I'd love to have you back on and talk to you about that, and even talk to you about how you and your wife kind of manage that sort of lifestyle difference and how you guys go out together. For those of you who are listening to iTunes and Spotify, please leave us a rating. You can also check the video replay out on YouTube now, because I'm going to be uploading things to YouTube. And
Nice.
thank you so much for listening to the Art of Fuel Unconventional Nutrition podcast with myself, Anthony Manuel, and our guest, Bryan Mirabella. We'll catch you next time, guys. Follow me on Instagram at The Body Moves, and we'll catch you for the next episode.